Hey, Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Justin. I'm excited to be here, man.
Yeah, look, if anybody has followed me on Instagram, if anybody has been to my events, they've seen your face in some way, shape, or form, whether it was your actual face or your sketches and all those other things. You're hands down one of the most creative people I've ever met in my life, which I love. You have a podcast on creative people. I had the honor of being on pretty early on, right?
You were the first guest, Justin. The very first
Yes.
guest.
I'm pretty
Yes.
proud of that. You know what's funny? I've actually been the first guest on a ton of podcasts, a
Mm.
ton. And, it's like that. Really, I feel honored to be that person because they essentially reach out to me and they go, hey, you inspired. I'm not saying I did this to you, but they'll say, like, you inspired me to start a podcast. I would love if you came on and you were the first guest. There was actually a show that just switched gears and it became fully a podcast driven podcast. So they talk about podcasting, and I was that first guest when they switched gears. And so, like, really cool stuff, man. So anyway, this is not about me. This is about you. You do the live event sketches, and so anybody who's seen my event sketches as they've gone up, that's all you, man. Let's talk. Let's start there. And actually, I usually
Sure.
go, "Hey, take us back," blah, blah, blah. But let's start there.
Yeah.
How did this idea of sketching live events start? Because now you've done, I mean, countless.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's been years. It happened like a lot of other things by accident, right? It was one of those deals where I think it was like 2015 or so, 16. And I was in Nashville. I was at an event, Jeff Goins' event. It's called Tribe at the time. It's no longer in existence, but I'm at this event and, I'm like, I'm feeling shy. I'm feeling a little introverted. I don't know anybody really. And so I'm like, okay, well, instead of holding a drink or something like that, right? I'm pretty much just sketching. I'm sketching because I'm like, this is what I do. This is what I love to do. And as I was doing it during the event, people started to take notice. And then also I noticed that people would come up to me and ask me like, hey, what are you doing? And it would open up conversations. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But the pivotal point for me was there was a guy who was there, Andy Traub, and he was giving away like 15 minutes of free time with him just to talk about any business ideas or anything you want to talk about. So I took him up on this offer during the event, and he knew what I was doing. And he said to me, he's like, this sketching that you're doing, this is actually like a business. This is like a service. And I was like,
Hmm.
what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is just something I quote, just do, right? Because so many of those things that we're too close to it. We don't see the value sometimes in our own creativity or efforts. And so he just started to open my eyes to this. And then I started to think like, well, what would this look like as a service that I could offer for business? Because ultimately it's storytelling, it's marketing, right? It's
Right.
creating art in real time, but people are using it on social media. They're using it in a lot of the graphics and the follow-up materials. Once sketches are done, as you know, they can be done. Anything can be done with it. So it was coming around this idea of I love to do this. I love to sketch in the moment. I love that it helps shed light on somebody else because I'm drawing somebody else, and the speakers and whoever's involved, the subject matter, they're always really appreciative and floored, honestly, a lot of times. And then it really helps with just the storytelling and the whole just bringing together a lot of areas that I really love. So it kind of seemed to be a no brainer after the fact, you know?
No, right. Yeah, yeah. And it's so funny because I think there's a lesson to be learned there, right? Like, to pay attention to these things that we're loving and people are noticing and go, wait, is there a business here? Is there an opportunity here? And look, this podcast is not all about making money. Sure, we talk about it, but at the same time, this podcast is about, adding value, right? And really adding value to individuals' lives. And how can we continue to do that on a more broad basis and be so abundant about it? And you added value, and in turn, it added value to you, right? You went, hey, I
Absolutely.
just want to do this just because I'm a little bit of an introvert and I enjoy this. And now here, oh, wait, here's a business idea, right? Now, obviously, you weren't always a full time artist. There was a time in your life where you had that job, but you always had kind of that passion that you grew up sketching and drawing and painting and doing all these things. Take us back to the moment where you're like, I can't do this corporate thing anymore. I really want to pursue my passion. What's the backstory there?
Yeah, so it wasn't quite as clean as that, but
Never is. It
it
never
never is, right?
is.
Exactly. But what happened was, when I was in art school, I had, well, actually before I went to art school, I had the conversation with my parents, right? And it was, of course, that dreaded conversation that parents always have, like, no, you don't want to go to art school, right? Don't you want to be a lawyer, a doctor, something, right? Something to make money. Don't be the poor starving artist. And so it was, okay, what if it was graphic design? Because at least graphic design is a marketable skill, right? You can make some money doing that and not be the poor starving artist.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I love music and I love entertainment. And so maybe if I do some design around that kind of stuff, I'd be okay with that. But in the process, I kind of convinced myself that I wasn't a quote real artist. Like I was a designer. I could work with fonts and colors and layout, things like that, sure. But when it came to like illustration or things that required like really precise rendering, I told myself that I wasn't really good at that. And my stuff was too messy and it was too frustrating of a process. So I kind of convinced myself that would never be for me as far as a path. So fast forward, I ended up going into the career, graphic design in various different contexts, whether it was large advertising agencies in New York City, corporate accounts, other places where I was the art department for magazines, everything in between. And eventually I hit this wall where, I'm in this groove doing this thing where it's like a deadline every 2 weeks, and I'm not even getting a chance to really enjoy or celebrate what I just did. And there's another deadline bearing down on top of it.
Yeah.
And I started to feel a little frustrated in that process. And then also, I had a hard time reconciling like, okay, I really like the people that I'm working with and I like the work itself, but there's just something that's disconnected here. And at the same time, I was very much plugged in at my home church, actually, where I was doing a lot of like people stuff. So meeting with people and just leading different things. And I felt like that was having more of an impact, honestly, in my life, and where it was more of a significant contribution, where I saw it actually making a difference in the lives of other people. Sure. And so I ended up leaving design for about 10 years, went into full-time ministry, ended up just a complete life turn.
Hold on. Did I know that about you?
I don't know, but you do now.
I do now. Like I don't think that I knew that you did that. Like I honestly thought that you were just graphic. I've known you for years. Anyway, continue. So I love. By the way, this is why I love when I get to interview like real friends, like people I've known for years, because I'll learn things that, and maybe I've heard it before, but it clearly didn't sink in until this moment. Holy crap! Okay, so you went into the ministry.
Yes. And, this was the kind of thing where I was like, okay, I'm not seminary material, right? I'm an artist. I went to art school, for crying out loud. I'm not going to be studying Greek and Hebrew. And I'm like, So I'm kind of like, God, if this is going to happen, then you're going to have to drop this in my lap kind of thing. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Is this position opened up. I ended up going to work with my best friend when I was a kid. And I was doing what I call the slash job in ministry, which was basically like all the things that nobody else wanted to do, right? It was nursery / college ministry / worship leading / Anyway, all that to say, was in this kind of groove where it was like, hey, show up, figure out what this looks like, almost a little entrepreneurial in fashion, because I didn't really have this set schedule of like show up at 9, leave at 5. It was much more loose than that. And a lot of freedom to go, you shape what this kind of looks like as long as you're doing the ministry work, right? So that kind of laid a little bit of a foundation for something. There was an evening service that was more like rock and roll church, if you will. The morning service was more like liturgy and robes and all the rest of that stuff. We were all about the rock and roll show, honestly. And that thing grew. Eventually, we kind of felt like, hey, I think it's time to go out on our own. And so we planted this church in Long Island, and it's still there today, and he's still the senior pastor. But that whole thing too was, okay, take a leap. There's no safety net. We're doing this. We're going out on our own. Like, how do you start a church? I don't know. Like, ask some people, figure some things out, make a lot of mistakes. A lot of crazy things happened in that time period that we just don't have time for today. But I mean, it was a wild ride, and the thing took off like a rocket. And there were 3 of us on staff, and we were doing like 5 services a day, and it was just crazy. Yeah. But in the process of that, what happened was I put my creativity on a shelf, and I had done nothing for 10 years of even my own personal art. And anything that I had was being sunk into the ministry stuff and helping other people. And quite honestly, a lot of roles that I just was not gifted at, but it was like, somebody has to do this. So figure it out. And so that led me to this place of suffering from depression, having to leave ministry, having to leave, basically it was like, faith, family, friends, finances, everything all in the same bowl. That's a lot of F's, you know what I'm saying? And when stuff gets F'd up, but it's really started to spiral. And then it led me to go, okay, I need to leave this. I've been out of design for 10 years. Where do I go? Like, am I done? I don't know what to do. I feel chewed up and I feel left behind. And I don't really know what my options are at this point. And all I do know is that I need to get healthy again. I need to deal with my mental health issues right now. And so that's what actually brought me to New Jersey. Ended up taking a position where I was working at a church, but doing graphic design. And it was during that season that there were just so many things that happened. It was like rock bottom. And I remember thinking to myself, I really need to get back to this place of creating, because it brought me joy at one point. Like when I was a kid, I would make greeting cards and I would give it to family members and see their face light up. And that exchange of being able to create something and serve somebody and see it impact them, I was like, that's the stuff right there.
Yeah.
How do I get back to that? Can I get back to that? And so that's what led me on my 365-day art making journey. That was, okay, let's show up. And maybe 10 minutes is all I can manage because I'm depressed, right? I don't have energy. I don't really know what to do. I'm blowing dust off my art supplies. And let's see where this leads, if it leads anywhere. And if nothing else, this is just for me, almost like journal writing. Can I get back to this place where this starts to bring me joy? And so the more that I started to show up, the more that I started to let it be a place of experimentation, self-discovery. I realized the things I didn't want to do, the things I did want to do. I started to get a little perspective and some health started to come. That's really the point at which things shifted for me. And it started to become more of a passion. And then I got to the end of year one and was like, okay, I did this. Great. I showed up every single day, but now what? And I was like, I don't think I'm done. And so I kept going. And eventually I started to uncover, okay, here's my style. Here's my voice. Here's how I want to show up. And then continue to refine and continue to build on this daily creative habit, what I call it now. And I've surpassed 10 plus years now. This past April was 10 years at the time of this recording. Amazing. And yeah, it's every single day showing up and doing something. And it has taught me not only things about myself and about what I want to create and the skill set, but it also taught me something about the journey. And I realized probably halfway through that I'm like, this isn't just for me. Like what I'm going through, the things I'm experiencing, the lessons I'm learning, like this is actually for other creative people and not just like visual artists. I think just other people who create anything. And so I started to identify like, what are some of those mile markers and what does this look like as far as a process? And how could I start to talk about this so that other people could be encouraged to either come back to their art or discover that thing that really they truly need to create because it's so aligned with who they are that they'll be lit up and the people around them will be blown away because they're like, yes, thank you for doing that. Thank you for showing up like that,
Yeah, no, for sure. It's interesting. I love the fact that obviously it's been over 10 years, which is mind blowing. Like how many people can say I've done something consistently every single day, whether it's sketching a coffee cup. And I use that as the first example because that's the first thing you drew, or it's, just doing something else creative, sketching something smaller, something bigger, something more elaborate, whatever, every single day for 10 plus years. And it's cool. Like when somebody sees you speak on a stage, you actually show a collage of all the drawings, first the year, then the 10 plus years, which is such a really cool visual to understand how important it is just to show up. Now, with that being said, you had mentioned that first day, how depressed you were and out of touch with your creativity and out of touch with happiness, really, right? I mean, if you're dealing with depression, that's something that you're lacking. Number one, how difficult was it, or can it still be when we're down in those moments, right, to show up? But on the flip side, how critical is it that we do for our mental health and our happiness?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it was very difficult because I didn't know if this was possible. So there was a lot of doubt, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of judgment, honestly. And at the end of the first day, you mentioned Starbucks coffee cup. That's what I drew the first day. It was 10 minutes and it was in pen and it was in a sketchbook. And I looked at the thing and I was like, good God, this thing is horrible. Like, I was so embarrassed. And I thought to myself, like, if anybody knew I went to art school and they saw that this is what I created, they'd be like, dude, what happened to you? Like, ew. And it was just a gut check moment. But I realized, like, okay, I have a choice right now in this moment. I could either say, this is bad and this is just how it's always going to be, and then close the book and forget this whole process and journey. Or I say, I practice grace for myself and realize, like, no, I'm not at the capacity that I used to be at. But I won't always be here in this place either, at this limited capacity. But this is what I can manage right now. So lean into wherever you are and whatever it is that you can manage, and know that it's not static, right? You're going to grow, develop, change, transform. And it may be slow, but it will happen. And I think that's something that's really important to hang on to, as, I talk to people about mental health and creativity. Having a place to go where you can almost process. And maybe that's not visually for drawing. If somebody's listening, they're like, well, I can't, quote, draw the stick figure, right? That's what a lot of people say. But maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's processing some other way in it takes form of a daily habit. It's leaning into that and almost like setting, like, for me, honestly, like, last year was a terrible year. I went through a divorce and it was like COVID, so things are still locked down and it was just lonely. And I was so thankful that I had that practice to show up every single day in place, because I leaned heavily on it. In the beginning, it was trying to develop that in the midst of depression. Last year, it was more of, okay, now I'm leaning on this because I'm going through some really hard stuff right now. And it's helping me have context. It's helping me not have to think about some things that would require to have a lot of energy and effort. I could just show up and do what I do. And so I think there's something really important to be said for having those kind of habits that are like guardrails that help you,
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who, and you had alluded to it earlier, like somebody goes, oh, I can't draw a stick figure, and therefore they feel like they're not creative, right? They feel like they're just not the creative person. They're very logistical, or they're very step 1, 2, 3. What would you say to them, or how to help them, and encourage them to discover their creativity? Because somebody's got something inside of them. Like, yes. I think I said when I was on your podcast, I always said that I wasn't creative, but this is just not true. Like, I mean, I look at what I do now and the things that I create in the podcast themselves, and there's always creativity behind those. And then even on, even something as stupid as an Instagram reel, there's creativity in creating that as well. So what would you say to somebody to help them maybe get out of that rut of thinking they're not creative and begin to build a process similar to what you just did?
Yeah. And I completely agree with what you said. And I have this conversation all the time, because people think about creativity in terms of, well, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't dance, I can't sing or play a musical instrument, what we refer to as, quote, the arts, right? The obvious expressions. But I believe that we are all creative. I think it's just in terms of like how it shows up. And so I think we need to start at this place where we expand our definition of what creativity is, right? And so the way that I've been coming around it recently has been more, I really believe that creativity is how we see things and then what we do as a result, right? So each one of us has a way that we approach life, the way that we think about things. And then what do we do as a result of that, right? Something that we're actually creating. And so like you said, it could be a podcast, it could be content for a blog or video or social media stuff. It could be decorating a home. It could be baking a cake. It could be the way that you arrange your schedule, right? That could show up in so many different places. But I think the first thing is expanding our definition. The second thing is taking a look at ourselves and going, okay, let's become students of ourselves so that we know how we're wired. We know the things that are important to us. We know what our go-tos are. And so if we're somebody who's really logical and somebody who's very organized, it's going to be within that context. It's not going to be something that's going to be like, hey, this is completely different, and now I'm doing like really messy, crazy, it's going to make sense and be aligned with who you are. And so I think it's being curious about yourself and going like, where can creativity show up? how can it show up in the things maybe that I'm already doing, and maybe I'm doing them in a different fashion, or using different materials, or maybe it's collaborating with somebody else and it's forcing me to approach something differently because now I have somebody else's opinions and everything they bring to the table. So it's asking a lot of questions early on. And then as far as a process, I talk about this, real quickly. I say three things that helped me in this were: one, start small. So boil it down to something that you can manage. Lower the bar a lot, because 5 or 10 minutes a day is so much better than waiting for an hour or a whole afternoon that never comes, right? And so realize that those small deposits add up over time. And you may have days where it goes beyond 5 or 10 minutes, and that's fine. But lower the bar enough where you can be successful at it to get traction and momentum. The second thing is, I always say, schedule it. Put it on your calendar, which I know sounds the most uncreative thing ever, but the fact is, a lot of us, we want to wait to be inspired. We want to wait for the muse. We want to wait for perfect things to align, and that doesn't happen. And so we never show up because it doesn't, the muse never came. I don't feel inspired. And so when we put it on our calendar, it forces us to take action first and set aside time so that inspiration then can come, and so that we can actually start to put actionable items in work for us. And then the third thing I say is to celebrate our wins, because so many times when you're in that process, you start to get some traction and momentum. It's easy for it to always be about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And you don't stop to track where you've been, right? So like you mentioned, the collage of visuals for me that I do, I did that because I wanted to see, okay, how am I showing up? I know I'm doing stuff, but it gets lost in the feed and in the daily whatnot. And so for me to stop and actually create these visual images, it's almost like putting X's on a calendar, right? For how many days did I show up? It's that visual reminder for me to go, oh yeah, this is how I showed up. And this is what it looked like. Oh, and wow, I did do a lot more than I actually remember at this particular moment. And so stopping to celebrate that, it reinforces that I'm doing good here. I may not be where I want to be yet, but I've certainly made progress. And so, there's that saying of what gets rewarded gets repeated. It's that idea of, let me reward myself for this journey and this process.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. One thing I noticed through time is usually in people who consider themselves creatives, musical artists, visual artists, whatever. A lot of times comes bad mental health. What do you think the correlation is there?
It's funny. I heard somebody else talking about this recently. I think there's a lot to do with the fact that as creative people, we're so much in our heads, right? Like we're thinking and analyzing and overanalyzing, and just there's so much going on up there that it's easy for us to get tripped up and to either believe false narratives, to not have proper perspectives on things. And because so much of creativity a lot of times is a solitary thing, right? Like when I go and I have this idea for this thing I want to draw or whatever, like I think up the idea, nobody's with me, right? Nobody's in my head. And then I'm actually executing the thing, which again is a solitary thing for me right now. So much of that process is alone, that I think we can get tripped up with the thoughts and the mindset stuff, and we keep that solitary as well. And not invite other people in the mix and talk about some things and expose some things and question things. For me, realizing like the mindset thing, I would always hear people talk about that, and I'm like, oh, I don't get it. Like, I don't, this affirmation stuff, this is weird. Like, yeah, I am strong, I am great, I am talented. Like, it just sounds like a bunch of, I don't know, this is crap, But I didn't have a good understanding of why I needed to be doing some of these things. And I wasn't in a process where I was examining my own thoughts on a regular basis. Sure. Even though I'm a big person who journals and likes to be sure that I'm practicing self-awareness. But I think it's having those conversations with yourself and then inviting other people in. And when you start to feel like you're the only one, like especially creative people want to be unique. Yeah. Right. I want to do something that nobody's ever done before. I want to be known as like that person, right? Amazing work. But we carry that all over also to our journeys and our experiences, and we think, oh, I'm the only one who's experiencing these hardships or these thoughts, these mental health struggles. And so when we start to approach ourselves in that way and thinking we're unique in our issues and problems, that sets us up for a fall too, because then we're not going to invite anybody in.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think obviously understanding and reflecting, but also bringing people into those thoughts, because anytime we battle anything, even business, right? Like you need somebody else there. Like there needs to be some sort of support system. Like I talk about the 5 people to surround yourself with. That's the book I'm writing now. And that's been the game changer in my life to keep me out of those ruts, to push me forward, to do all those things. Because, mental health is a serious issue that we talk about, that we should talk about more. And I know that people are now opening up more and more, but I feel like the more conversations you can have, and you're pretty open in your community about mental health and struggling and opening up and talking about it, which I think is so powerful, because I think the more people see that, the more they feel welcomed in to say, hey, you know what, I am struggling with this. Hey, I have thought about this, or I'm feeling down right now, whatever the case would be. People always say that. And so I wanted to ask you a pretty serious question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I actually want you to explain how much you love snow to people.
Oh, this is a deep, serious question. Seething hatred would be good. Yeah.
Dude, I love it.
My and Justin is referring to the fact that my very first book that I illustrated and published was called Dear Snow: One Man's Angry Rant Against Winter. And this book came out of a series of tweets back in 2008, I believe. I was shoveling, the plow's coming down, fills in everything I just shoveled out. And I'm like, really? Like, what the heck? Like, and so that just started me complaining on Twitter. And then that turned into fodder for this book that I then illustrated. So yes, I indeed hate snow with my whole self.
So dude, you gotta move to the warm climate to help with the mental health stuff, because I'm telling you right now, seasonal depression is real deal, man.
It is.
Like
it really is.
When we have like the daylight savings time, which is coming up next weekend, when that happens for like a month, like I'm down and out, man. I'm feeling it. I'm like, okay, and then I'm able to kind of snap out of it and move on and whatever. But I brought it up as a joke, obviously, saying, hey, this is a very serious question. By the way, go get that book. It's funny, it's clever, it's all the things. So make sure you guys can grab that. But I think creativity is can be such a trap for people, and then also can be such an outlet. And I love your approach of just showing up every single day, because I think you avoid the trap when you let go of expectations and you just show up, because over time you're just going to get better, which I absolutely love, man. So I want to ask you a question. I used to ask this question all the time back in the day, stopped asking it for a really long time, recently brought it back because I think it's a cool question. But I was just wondering, at the end of your life, if all your art disappears off the face of the planet, that doesn't exist anymore, the snow book is gone, all the things, and you could only be remembered for one sentence, what would that sentence be?
He made me feel seen and heard.
It's powerful. And you're certainly that person. Like the one thing I always appreciate about you is when we see each other at these events and all, whether it be my event or Terry's event or, wherever. I didn't go to Mike Kim's event because I'm not in his mastermind, but I feel like I missed out because Paul Klein was talking about it too. But, with that being said, like I always feel like you are such a present person. You're so present in the moment, unless you're sketching, but you're so present in the moment where you sit and you listen and you actually hear people. So I 100% agree with you. You are that person. I think that is definitely at least one of the probably many sentences that you'll be remembered for in the far, far distant future. When this life comes to an end, I think that you will certainly be remembered for that, man. So when I ask you another question that I ask every single person on the show, it's a 2-part question. The first part is, what's your definition of success? The second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
It's funny. Success has really been something that has evolved over time as I've evolved, right? And I think maybe that's just comes with age and experience. These days, success to me means having a rich, full life, like experiencing new opportunities and fulfilling experiences, rich relationships, so many of the things that are not tied to a chase or unhealthy craving. Um, and there are moments where in a day where I'm starting to become more aware of, oh, these are the things that are happening that I can be grateful for, that are in alignment with that. Earlier this year, I started to come around this concept and this idea of really letting go, and letting go of attachments of the past, letting go of attachments in the future, right? The expectations that we can sometimes get so bogged down on, not trying to force, whether it's relationships or opportunities, what work looks like, any of those things. I realized that for a long time I was trying to force that because I thought that's what success was. Mm-hmm. When I can dream something up, because I'm a creator, right? When I can dream it up and make it happen. And what I'm learning is that there's so much more value in letting go and embracing what is, instead of trying to make it into what you want it to be, which is hard because so much of us, we want to control things, we want to know things, and we still want to have things that we're aimed towards, right? But I think it's that sense of I'm not going to get stuck in the past, nor am I going to crave certain preferences for the future so much that I miss today. And you mentioned that about being present and being here. I've been processing that of like, what does it look like instead of always pushing for the next? What does it look like to be in the now and to be fully present, to be aware and go, the things that I have celebrated as success and identified as success, let me not miss those, because they may be right in front of me. And I could miss them if I was on to the next thing and the next thing. And so to answer the second part of that question, the 3 things that I do each day, the first thing is I have a gratitude journal. And I wake up and I've forced myself early on to crack this thing open. And it's really simple, just going like, okay, what are you thankful for today, right now, in this moment? And setting an intention for the day, right? Like, what would make today great? Answering some of those kind of questions. And I'll be honest, New York guy, right? I got this thing. And I was like, what? Come on. Like, really, the eye roll was hard, man. It was like, I was getting a lot of traction on the eye roll at first, because I'm like, really, like, this kind of seems silly and stupid. But once I got past that, the like, I'm thankful for my bed, I'm thankful for coffee, I'm thankful for, it really started to train me to look and be aware in my day and go like, oh, you know what? Yeah, like I had a fleeting conversation with somebody today when I was in line at the store someplace, and I would have forgotten all about that. But this is making me more aware of that and thankful that I had that little exchange. And that actually is part of real life and the important stuff. The small moments are the actually the big moments, right? So that gratitude journal has been really helpful, in the morning, and then at night you kind of review and write like, here were the highlights of the day. And that's been huge. The other thing too is I do journal a lot, not quite every day, but most days I do journal. And that's me setting intention even more so of like, here's the things that I'm processing through. Here's the intentions I want to set for this day for myself, how I want to show up, who I want to be. And then my creative, journey continues. I'm always creating something. And these days, even that has shifted a little bit, right? I'm still doing visual art, but there's also a lot more writing. There's a lot more reflecting on my experiences and moving into this place of going, I want to share how I see things and what I've experienced, because when I do that, it seems to resonate with other people. And the more that I can do that, the more helpful I think I can be to other people, even as I'm trying to process things myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's in public and social media, right? Um, but leaning more into that, accepting more of that kind of role as almost like the guide, if you will, the silver sage, right? With my hair. I've been called that, believe it or not.
I love it.
But so, it's all those things. It's the gratitude journal, it's my regular journaling, and it's creativity every single day in some capacity,
Awesome. Awesome, man. I love it. And I loved your answer to all of that, especially, your definition of success. I think that's so true, right? It's not a destination.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful, dude. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how do people get a hold of you? Where do they get your artwork? Where do they get the books? Where do they follow you? What's all the good stuff?
Yes, all the good stuff, all the things, because I do a lot of things. But if you go to the hub, which is mikebrennan.me, M-E, that will bring you to Daily Creative Habits, which is my community, and also a free email newsletter that people can receive if they want to just be encouraged to create their own things. And you can also go to dailycreativehabit.com for a shortcut on that stuff. But on the hub of mikebrennan.me is all my social links. It's all my illustration stuff, links to the books, anything really that's about me, the podcast, creative chats. It's all right there. And you can just click on whatever thing that you're interested in. And I'm also very active on Instagram. MikeBone is my handle there. And so stop in, say hi.
Sweet. Love it, man. And so, like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been
Mhm.
your biggest moment of growth?
Wow. Part of me wants to say like the moment that I'm in at any given moment, because I'm always processing something new and trying to figure out what is my current reality saying to me and how is it challenging me to show up differently. And so, you know, obviously we talked about me being in the season of depression, coming back to my art. That was huge because that set me on a journey that helped me identify my passion, helped me really identify a lot of things about myself, and then also helping other people. And I think also last year, having to go through that difficult time with a divorce and lockdown and COVID and all the rest of that stuff the past couple of years, that has brought me out now to a place of going, okay, it feels like there's more of a leveling up that's happening in how I'm showing up, how I'm talking about things, a clarity and an alignment that has not necessarily been there in the past. And so, it's not a clear cut answer of this is a time, but I guess maybe I'll stand on that statement of like the given moment that I'm in, that's the time at which it's being most impactful and meaningful to me.
I love it, man. Mike, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey and your wisdom. Guys, make sure you check him out, MikeBrennan.me or Mike Bone on Instagram, or both. Just do both.
Yeah.
That's what you should do. Do both of those things. But Mike, dude, thank you so much for coming on. And more importantly, man, thank you for your friendship. I've always enjoyed talking to you and spending time with you. So
Same
this has
here.
been great. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Justin. Thank you.